Welcome back, guys, to another episode of Smalls That Sell. And for those of you that are new to the channel and wondering exactly what we're talking about, it's all about breaking down trending items from the big box stores and turning them into low-cost, high-profit items that you can put your twist to it and sell like crazy. It's items like this galvanized sided crate. These are hot. These are trending right now, and they are wanting a fortune for them. And so that's where I come in. I'll teach you how to build this for a super cheap price so you can maximize your profits on anything that you sell. I'll be covering this build just a little bit later in the video, so let's go ahead and hop into it. Okay, so this first one I've been seeing on several different sites. And if you've been following this series, you know that that is a red flag for a super hot item. And I have to admit, these things are pretty cool. They go by different names. I'm just going to call it a sliding shelf. The way that it's actually built is for each one of these shelves to be adjustable. So far, I've only found one problem with the several different companies that make these, and that is that the average price for these things is $250. So for this build, I really wouldn't consider it a small. I'm going to say that it's a medium, but it's super easy to build. The one thing that's going to be a little different about this than some of our other projects is that you do not want to use a softwood for this. So our pine builds, our picket builds, that's kind of out for this one. So I would use a hardwood of some type for this. They're using oak, and then some of these have used cherry or walnut. And the main reason why you need to use a hardwood is because this entire shelving unit is being supported by the backboard against the wall and then the joinery in the corners. And we'll get into that here in a minute because it's actually a very important part of this build. So I'm going to break down the most common style that I have found of this, which is going to have 3 boards running horizontally and then with a slim vertical frame. So let's just start with what they're using for shelving boards. Every one that I've seen, they've used the exact same material that they've made their support frame as the shelves. Well, that's the first thing that I would change up. Say that if I use oak strips to make my frame, then maybe I should throw some contrast in there for the shelves. And the shelves really don't have to be a hardwood because they're being supported by the hardwood frame. Okay, so what I figured out is that each one of these shelves are 3/4 of an inch thick, 16 inches long, and 5 inches wide. So the shelves are actually done once you have those dimensions. So now let's go ahead and break down the most important part of this entire thing, the frame. So just to make sure that we have plenty of support, I'm going to say that this frame is made out of 2.5 inch material that is 3/4 of an inch thick. Now for you pallet project warriors out there, this is going to be a perfect build because a lot of times on those heavy duty pallets, you're going to have 3/4 of an inch oak, and a lot of times you're stripping on top. It's going to be 5 inches wide. But regardless of where you get your material to build this thing, the most important part of this is going to be the joinery. And in almost every single style that I've seen of this, they have used the exact same type of joinery. It looks like a type of single tooth box joint right on the very ends. And the reason why they're using that specific joint, besides, let's say, just pin nails and glue, is because that's a really strong joint. For this build, this entire unit is 25 inches tall and 6 inches deep. So if you're going to be using this type of joinery, your 2 top pieces will need to be 6 inches long, and your front and back boards will need to be the full 25 inches long. And then for the top and bottom boards, you would need to measure in 3/4 of an inch, mark across your board, and then remove material on both sides of that board, leaving a 3/4 of an inch tab or a tongue in the very center. And then to mate up the front and the backs, that's all that you would have to do is use that tongue as a template on the top of your vertical boards, trace that out, and then remove the material in the center 3/4 of an inch deep. Now you can do the material removal several different ways. If you have a dado stack, it's going to make this a piece of pie. Or you can make a simple table saw jig for making box joints. Honestly, that's what I would do if you did not have a dado stack, because they are super easy to make, and really the only other option is going to be cutting this out by hand and then using a chisel to square everything up, which is fine if you're just making 1 or 2, but if you want to mass produce these things, go ahead and spend the 30 minutes to make a box joint jig. So if you've decided to go with the box joint method, you have your ends cut, but before we assemble this thing, we need to cut the notches on our 25 inch boards that the shelves are actually sliding in. So that's what gives these shelves the ability to be adjusted. They're just sliding back and forth in these 3/4 of an inch notches that they have cut into the inner sides of these boards. So I take my 2 25 inch boards. It looks like maybe 4 inches from the top, 4 inches from the bottom, and 1 in the very center. So that's where we'll actually be putting our notches. Again, if you have a dado stack on your miter saw, you'd raise it up 1/4 of an inch and either using a table saw sled or a miter gauge, just slide the board across, making these notches. But you can also do this with your miter saw or even a circular saw. If you're using the miter saw, you would set your depth stop so that the blade is only cutting 1/4 of an inch deep, and just slide your board down between cuts until you get to 3/4 of an inch. Now let's say that you're using a circular saw. That's all that you would do, is just set your blade depth to 1/4 of an inch. I would use a framing square against the edge of my saw, that way it keeps my blade straight, and then make these cuts removing one blade thickness at a time until you're at your 3/4 of an inch mark. So never look at a project and say, oh, I don't have the tools to make this happen. Well, what did people do before there were dado stacks and all of these other fancy tools? They figured it out. Almost every single one of these new fancy tools, if you follow it back, it leads to a basic hand tool. The table saw is essentially a circular saw turned upside down. And then the circular saw took the place of a hand saw. So you get what I'm talking about. Just because you don't have a specific tool, don't lie to yourself and say, I can't do projects because I don't have fancy tools. Yes, you can. So back to this shelf, we have all of our notches cut, our joinery is cut. Now we just need to glue these things up on their ends. And if it were me, I'd actually drill a hole through the side or through the top and bottom center tongues and attach a screw or a dowel, making sure to lock everything in. Because again, all the weight's going to be transferred to the board in the back. So with that being said, whenever you go to mount this, it needs to be secure in the back. Now there are a couple of these that had keyhole cutouts where you just slide this thing over some screws. But to me, that may be just a little bit thin. I would actually use an easier method. And inside the notches where the shelves will be sliding, I pre-drill a hole in each one of those on the board that's going against the wall and make sure to mount this into a stud. Once everything is mounted, you can slide your boards in from the end and you're set. Now, as far as how much will this cost you to make, it's really just going to depend on where you're getting your wood. But I will guarantee you, no matter what type of wood that you're wanting to use, you're not going to come anywhere near $250, and with a couple of jigs and just a little bit of creativity, you could pump these babies out and blow your competition out of the water. So if you enjoy videos like this and you do not want to miss an episode, make sure to hit the subscribe button in your bottom. Can't say subscribe. Make sure to hit the subscribe. Make sure to hit the subscribe button. Make sure to hit my logo in the bottom right hand corner, which is also the subscribe button, which is also the subscribe button. And it also may be interesting and it may also be interesting watching me learn how to speak. This next one I've seen on several sites. Usually they come in sets of 2, and that is this galvanized sided crate. Okay, we've talked about it in the past. Crates are hot. Crates are always hot because they can be used on people's porches. They can be used inside of their houses. Really, the possibilities are endless. But what caught my eye about this one is that so many stores were selling these things and they were getting $75 for a set of 2. Now, the cost to build one of these things is a little harder to pinpoint because of the galvanized sheeting. One of these full-size sheets is $20 at your local big box store, but you're only using a tiny section, so you can make tons of these things out of just the one sheet. I actually made this one and the matching larger one just out of some scrap that I had laying around here. I'll be using the smaller 14-inch long one as an example, but for the set I made a larger one to match that was a couple of inches wider and longer. And that's all that you would do to make the larger one, is the dimensions that I'm about to give you. Just add a couple of inches to your parts and the assembly will all be the same. And as always, I'm about to teach you step by step on how to build this. If you're a plans in the hand type of person, head over to my website. I'll throw a link in the description. So for the wood for this, I bought a 1x8 by 8 foot. But if you're going to make 2 of these of this size, go ahead and get a 1x10. I actually ended up using just a little bit over half of my board. So to start off with, a 1x8 is actually 7¼ inches wide. So go ahead and rip that down to an even 7 inches wide. Then once you have your board ripped down to 7 inches, we'll go ahead and cut off 2 parts 8 inches long, and that will be our ends. So while we're working with the ends, we can go ahead and put the handles in. So to make this handle is super easy. From the top, I measured down 1.5 inches, made my mark, and then at 2 3/4 I made a mark. That will give me my opening thickness. From the sides of my boards, I measured in 1.5 inches from each side. So once you have all of that marked out, just connect those in a square. And now you have your area laid out, but you don't want the square look. You want this rounded over look in the corner. You can make that corner cut with a jigsaw. Even easier, just use 1 1/4 inch Fastener or spade bit. And that's all that I did, was drill a hole all the way through my board on each side of the handle. Once those 2 holes were drilled, I just took a jigsaw and cut straight across and connected those 2 holes, making this handle. Then you would just repeat that for your second board. So with our 2 ends cut and prepped, now we can assemble our sides. Then to make the side panels, I took the rest of my board and cut it down to 1.5 inch strips. So once you have your 1.5 inch strips, you need to cut 4 of those that are 11 inches long. It's going to be the top and the bottom of the frame. And then you'll cut 4 that are 7 inches long. And that's going to be our 2 sides. So once I had those cut, I wanted to just assemble this outside frame first. And to connect these, I put with 2 pocket hole screws on each side of the top and bottom board, and that gave me my outer frame. As far as this V design in the middle, I just ripped some of my 1.5 inch stock down to 3/4 of an inch, then put a 46-degree angle on each side of these, leaving this part 6 3/4 of an inch long from tip to tip. I just used a little bit of CA and wood glue and glued those into place. So at this point we have our 2 panels and our 2 ends. Now for the galvanized material, like I said at the beginning, you can pick it up at your big box stores. It's about $20 for a sheet, but it's a big sheet. And you're only going to be needing 2 sections that are 5 3/4 of an inch wide by 12 inches long. Once you have those cut with your panel facing down, just lay your galvanized metal on top, pre-drill, and screw this into place around the frame using 1/2 inch screws. So now the hardest part, the side panels, are complete. And to connect the side panels to the end, that's all that I did was take my 2 ends, drilled pocket holes on each side, inset it into my 2 panels, then use pocket hole screws to attach these. And if you would like, you don't even have to use pocket hole screws for that step. You could just slide this into place and just use some brad nails and glue. And then for the bottom, I'm still using my 1.5 inch strips. They're 12.5 inches long, and I need 3 of those. I slid those into place with 1 on each side and 1 in the very center, and then attached them to my end board using wood glue and brad nails. And that's all there is to it. And to size up, that's all that you would have to do is just add a couple of inches of length and width to those dimensions. All right, so you know that big pile of cutoffs that you just look at and you're like, well, one day I'll be able to find something useful for that. Well, today is the day. Check this out. I've seen these on a couple of different sites, and it's a genius idea, actually. They're pretty much taking what I would consider scrap cutoffs, and they're taking what is hot right now, which is floating shelves, and they're making small floating shelves out of their scraps. And on top of that, the average price for a set of 3 of these is $30. So $10 a piece for a piece of scrap. So as an example of just how easy this is, I went to my someday pile and pulled out this piece. Okay? Or really its brother. Looks almost the same. But I made this. Check it out. So this was a cutoff from another project that I couldn't throw away, and that's all that I did to shake things up with it a little bit, because every one of these that I've seen have been perfectly square, was I just ran a router around the edge and put a little cove in it. And no, you do not have to have walnut and cherry and things like that to make an awesome looking shelf that will sell. The only thing that you need to do is get creative with it. And if you wanted to actually get away from the square look altogether, how awesome would it be if this was actually a rounded over design? So by using 2 simple parts, you can essentially turn anything into a floating shelf. And to mount it, that's all that you'd have to do is find where your stud is at. I would pre-drill, and then you just screw this thing in. Once it's flush against the wall, you're set. And the 2 things that you're going to need to turn any piece of scrap wood into a floating shelf is a stainless steel T-nut, which is about 12 cents a piece, and then a hanger bolt. So the hanger bolt is threaded on one end, just like a screw, and then on the opposite end, there's bolt threads that will thread into a T-nut. As far as installing these T-nuts, it's a piece of pie. Since this is a 1/4 of an inch T-nut, I'm going to size up a 1/16 of an inch and use a 5/16 bit to drill the hole in the back so that the T-nut will slide in. And you see I put a piece of tape on the end, and that's all that I used that for, was to mark the length of the threads on the bolt hanger so I'd know how deep to drill the hole. Since this is not very deep, you could probably freehand it and get it pretty straight. But if you're making several of these, just go ahead and use a bit guide. That way that you know that your shelf will be perfectly straight once you screw it into the wall. So once you have your hole drilled, you would just place your T-nut over that hole and then hammer this in. The reason why you need to hammer it, these T-nuts are actually made with these 4 little teeth on the side to actually dig into the wood. That way whenever you're tightening things up, it doesn't just spin in the hole. If you'd like to really secure this thing in there, you could put some CA glue on the inside before you inserted the T-nut, and it would lock everything together. But honestly, the teeth alone do a great job of holding things into place. I'll throw the links in the description for both these bolt hangers and the T-nuts. The bolt hangers are about 39 cents a piece. The T-nuts are right around 12, 13 cents a piece. So for a little over 50 cents and a piece of scrap wood, this is a money-making project. If you decide to route your piece out like I did, let's put a little thought into this. Most shelves that people hang on the wall are not below eye level. Usually they're a little bit higher. So what I would do is actually put my routing on the bottom of the board, because essentially that's what's going to be seen. Now that's just what I would do, but the cool thing about being a maker is you can do whatever you want. So for those of you that have not checked out the new website, make sure to do that. This will be a place where you can get updates about what's going on in our community, as well as a place to pick up super cool merch like this shirt or even leather patch hats. Again, this new site's at MatthewPeech.com. or I'll throw the link in the description. So there was one type of an item that I noticed that was on the trending sections of every one of these sites while I was doing the research for this video, and that is console tables. Almost every one that I looked at were super easy to build, and they all had a pretty high price tag. So the reason why people love console tables is because they are slim. That's the way that they're designed. They're designed to put under a framed picture or a piece of art. So by having that slim design, that cuts way down on our material and cost. So this is the one that I chose to break down for you guys just because I want to show you how simple that this thing is to build. But what I would do if I were going to make some of these to sell is just to go online, type in console table, get some different styles, different ideas, mash those all together and create your own unique design. That way that the only place that someone can buy something like that is from you. But again, this table caught my eye because of how simple it would be to build, and it was $108. And you may be thinking $108 for a table, that's really not bad. If you take a close look at this, check out what it's made out of. Look at the legs. You see the rounded corners? Those legs are 3.5 inches wide. Those are 2x4s. Okay, so they have literally taken one 2x4 because the length of these legs are only 23 inches long. So out of one 2x4, you can get your 4 legs and still have plenty of room for your cutoffs. Now, they didn't even attempt to square these legs up to take off that rounded corner. Just do the extra step, take the extra time, and just cut off 1/8 of an inch from each side. Get rid of those 2x4 corners, and it actually clean this look up a lot. So we know what the legs are made out of. But what about the rest? Well, the rest could be anything because they have distressed this. And the distressing is one of the key points of what makes this sell. So this is going to be marketed as a primitive Americana or a distressed look or farmhouse look. You can word it however you want, but they pretty much all mean the same. If you're a pallet wood person, pallet wood. It's perfect. So this entire console is 26 inches long and 8 inches deep. That's telling me that the entire width of the top is 8 inches. But if you look really close, that's not a solid 8-inch board. That's made up of multiple boards. So if you're using pallet wood, then you can use multiple size boards. If it were me, I'd take a few fence pickets because they're only a couple bucks a piece. I'd rip each one of those down to 4 inches, and I could use that material for every other piece of this project. So for the top, I would just take 2 of those, butt those together. You could either attach those from the bottom or the top. This is supposed to be rustic or primitive, so there's really no way to completely mess this up. Before we get to the top, we have to have a base. What I would do to quickly assemble this base, take your 2x4, let's say that the edges are cut off of this one. Then I'd lay 2 down that are 23 inches long on a flat surface. Take one of my 4-inch boards that I cut, and I'm actually going to be using that as the apron that goes across the top. I would lay it on top of my 2x4 and overlap it by about 1 inch, and then maybe throw some wood glue in there and then just screw this down. Then while everything is still flat and your top apron is attached, let's go ahead and attach this bottom board. I'd measure up 2 inches from the bottom and then attach this the exact same way that you attached your top board. And once it's fastened on both sides, you now have your front panel. And then you would make another one of those identical, okay? And that's going to be your back panel. So now you have both your front and back panels built. So what about the sides? How do you connect these two together? So the inside of both panels will look something like this. It's all that you'd have to do in this case is to take another piece of your board that is cut 4 inches long. This one's a little bit longer, but you get the point here. And then attach it just like this from the inside. Just butt it right up, put some wood glue in there, tack it in with a couple brad nails, and then maybe pre-drill and throw in a couple of screws if you want. And with your 2 top boards on, you'll actually have overhang on both sides, giving it this inset apron look. And then for the bottoms, you would just take another 4-inch board and connect the 2 panels. And now your 2 panels are connected and you have this thing all framed out. And then for the bottom shelf, you would just continue to cut 4-inch long boards, which will bring it even with the inside of the 2x4s, and just run those across the bottom in the opposite direction of your top. This whole project is super simple. You could probably assemble this entire table in less than 30 minutes and have less than 10 bucks in the entire build. The only thing that would really increase your price much would be the paint that you decide to use. But really, this would be a perfect project just for some old paint that you had laying around. Again, this is distressed. So once that paint dries, you're going to sand it down anyway and rough it up. Now, for me, even if I'd made my legs out of 2x4s and fence pickets for all my aprons, the top I would actually leave natural, maybe just dress up the bottoms, kind of like what they have here. But I would want to add some contrast to this top. So if I were doing it, I would probably use some reclaimed pine just because that's what I have around here. Or if you have pallet wood, go ahead and sand that pallet wood down a bit, let those natural colors come out, and be a contrasting color to the rest of this build. But regardless of how you decide to do this, keep in mind on the low side, these things are selling for 108 bucks. I just showed you how to build one for less than 10, so you have plenty of room there to add in some creativity creativity and still keep a crazy high profit margins. So for this next one, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on because we have essentially covered this in several different videos, just in different shapes. And the OPB is trying to play Cupid this Valentine's Day with their heart-shaped cheese board. Okay, so we have seen these cheese boards before. We have talked about them. We have talked about how their marketing strategy actually keeps the exact same product but changes the name from time to time, and how they must be selling the heck out of this whole concept because they have created a design for this for every single holiday, every single season. So why not Valentine's Day? This is a form of decor, okay? This is a decoration. And people that are into decorating their houses, they will change this stuff out with every single season and holiday. They have created an evergreen concept and they are milking it for all that it's worth. But all of these that I have seen so far, they're super unique, super cool, and super easy to make. Now, do I like these enough to pay $185 for one of these cheese boards? No, but I like them enough to make several of these for just a couple of bucks a piece and sell them for $50. But I'm not going to bore you with the details on how they have actually put all of this together because I've taught you this a couple of times in the past. So if you haven't seen that, just check out a couple of my other videos, apply that exact same concept to this. You have a very expensive cheese board. I just wanted to share this with you so that whenever you are creating unique items to sell, think about how you can make it evergreen for different seasons. Just like the OPB here. This is a genius marketing move on their part and for this product. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you were able to take something away from that, even if it was just a concept or a lesson. But whatever you took from this video, run with it, apply it to your builds, and create something awesome. Till next time, guys, we'll see ya.